Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the fourth ChromoCast. There's an interesting article I wanted to get into in some depth today, so I think it's going to be the only one in this video. I might have another one a little later. India counted 640 million votes in one day, and Elon Musk had a reaction to that kind of went viral. And I think that there's a lot of stuff in that we can use to break down the differences in the electoral system between the US and India. So I think it's really interesting. So let's read the article. Let's break it down and get into it, guys. India counted 640 million votes in one day. Elon Musk on the tragic delay in California's results. Elon Musk criticizes the U.S. election process, praising India's efficiency in counting votes, highlighting California's slow ballot counting. Billionaire businessman Elon Musk on Sunday, November 24th, 2024, took a swipe at the U.S. electoral process, with Californians yet to officially announce the results of the presidential polls more than 2 weeks after it was held, and drew a contrast with the voting processes in India. CEO Elon Musk praised India's election process, highlighting the country was able to count a staggering 640 million votes in just one day. Sharing on a post on X, the social media platform he owns, Mr. Musk wrote, "India counted 640 million votes in one day. California is still counting votes." He posted a facepalm emoji with his post to express his resentment. In contrast, Mr. Musk noted that California is still struggling to count votes, which he termed tragic in response to a meme posted by an X user. Donald Trump won a second term as the president of the United States, securing 295 electoral votes in the 2024 presidential election, defeating the Democrat Kamala Harris, who garnered 226 votes. It was 312, though, wasn't it? It's interesting. I don't know. Okay. So, yeah, when you hear India counts 640 million votes in one day, and you hear California still counting 300,000, yeah, it's sketchy. Like, I get sketched out when I hear that, right? And I think as we should, there's a lot of stuff that changed during COVID that I don't really see as being legitimate changes to our election system personally, right? And there's a lot of ways that certain states violated their own constitution, and they have the sovereignty to do so, and the federal government can't demand that they listen to their own constitution. So you know, I get that they have the right to do it, but there's stuff that sketched me out that happened and changed during COVID that honestly I'm not cool with and I think needs to change. So I'm sketched out when I hear 40 million votes in India counted in one day, and we're still struggling to count 300,000 out in California. But I think also what this gives us an opportunity to focus on is the difference between India's Electoral College and the U.S. Electoral College, because India's Electoral College prioritizes the proportional resentment based on population and prioritizes like more of a purely democratic and parliamentary style system, as opposed to the U.S. that really emphasizes the principles of federalism and state sovereignty and the idea that you want to ensure geographical diversity and prevent the dominance of like those densely populated urban areas from creating like a tyranny of the majority. That's in the U.S., during the foundation of our country, we were particularly worried about two things: tyranny of the majority or a tyranny of the minority. And we wanted to ensure that we had checks and balances that made sure that government was difficult enough to move and changed in a slow enough way that people were able to make their voices heard, right? And so when we get frustrated about how large and difficult to change and slow to move our government is, that was actually the intention, because it allows everyone to see what's going on before things are swept up, kind of like Nazi Germany or Mussolini's Italy, and you don't want the mob in the street, you know, but that's also part of the reason why we're so scared of populism in this country too, you know, because we're scared of populism turning into that kind of wave, that tyranny of the majority. But I think this is a really good opportunity to explain the differences between the Indian Electoral College and the American Electoral College. And I think, you know, it's an important question to ask. Why do these systems work so differently? And what do these differences tell us about how a parliamentary system versus a traditional federalist system works, right? Between the two. And, you know, it's interesting because both systems are similar in some ways. Both of them focus on balancing representation with democratic ideals. Both rely on intermediary bodies, an electoral college, to elect their presidents. India like we said earlier, prioritizes efficiency and has a streamlined process that's handled on a federal level with a federal regulatory body. The U.S. prioritizes sovereignty through decentralization, and that's established through state sovereignty, and each state has the right to have their own election boards, and largely the federal government does not have the jurisdiction to regulate these election boards as a respect to state sovereignty. And so what that kind of results in is, in India, they have a parliamentary democracy where proportional representation aligns with the area's population density, right? And votes in India's Electoral College system are weighted by the population, which means in a more populous state, those regions have greater influence. Those votes are weighted higher, right? This system is designed to more directly represent the overall population and ensures areas with larger populations have a proportionately larger say in the presidency. But it also offers less of a protection to the less populous communities it offers less of a protection against the risk of a rule by majority, right? And so you could have a party or a nominee for a party that focuses on only representing those largely populous states and largely works to or largely ignores the less populous areas and still wins the election because the disproportionate population density and the weighted votes. And so that's why the U.S. system balances that regional diversity with state sovereignty in more of like a traditional federalist system. The U.S. college gives the states a mix of population-based electors and state-based electors, right? And so that's kind of managed naturally through the way our Congress functions, the House representation and the Senate representation. Smaller states benefit from disproportionate representation in the Senate because they have the same amount of electors in that body as the more populous areas, right? And so that gives them, it just gives them slightly more of a say. And the idea is that it creates a hedge against the more populous areas being able to overpower the less populous areas. And I personally lean towards that. Now, I grew up in America. I didn't grow up in India. Maybe if I grew up in India, I would see the value in that, in the other system. But I think we have an amazing place in this country. And I think that if you look at the economic disparity that exists in India versus the U.S., it's actually lower in the U.S. There's more economic equality in the U.S. than India. And I think that's important to recognize when we're talking about these parliamentary systems. But, you know, it's a trade-off either way. And so India's focus on speed and centralization in the vote counting process prioritizes efficiency and inclusivity. And so that's clearly reflected when we see stuff like the comments Elon Musk made. It provides a more accurate reflection of the population's overall will, but that also runs the risk of rampant populism, in my opinion. In my opinion, that focusing on the needs of the majority allows for the backdoor to toxic populism, if that makes any sense, right? And we've seen that happen in a lot of times. French Revolution. I already talked about the contemporary examples of Germany and Italy. You know, and a lot of times we've seen the desire of populism to represent the lower classes be manipulated by the upper classes, and what you end up at the end is some level of corporatism or neo-feudalism. And so, you know, I personally see the value in having a hedge against that kind of tyranny of the majority. It's very important to me. And so, the U.S. system, unlike India's, right? India's provides a more accurate reflection of the population's overall will, but it sacrifices that ability to protect those less populous states from the majority populations, right? The U.S. system prioritizes checks and balances through federalism, and that leads to localized autonomy, voting locally. The most change you have in your community is voting locally in your local politicians. But that results in what we talked about earlier with that slower bureaucracy, right? Because that gives people time to make their voice heard. Not everyone is on the ball paying attention 24/7. And we have a system in this country that allows everybody to hear about what's going on and everybody to participate. And it can be frustrating at times, but that frustration is a good thing because it's motivational frustration and it allows us to get involved and have ownership in our society, which is very important. And it also ensures regional diversity. Like we said, minority protection by amplifying the voice of rural states. This can result in outcomes where the national popular vote does not always reflect the elected president, right? The elected president can slightly lose the national popular vote and still win the Electoral College. But that is an important trade-off to ensure that we're not getting a politician that ignores the needs of one side of the aisle. It's very important that we have politicians that work to represent everyone and are forced to understand their need to represent everyone in this country. And unfortunately, with the polarization of our politics, that's being lost. But we need to get it back, and it's really reassuring to have something like that kind of built into the function of our system. Why do the delays matter in the U.S.? Why are we sketched out when we see all of these halts when weeks later California still counting ballots, when we see one candidate win the day of, weeks later, then they refuse to call it, and then all of a sudden they start losing by 32 votes? Why does this sketch us out? Why does this matter? Okay. During COVID, a lot of states in this country made changes to the election process. Okay. Increasing mail-in ballots, changing how mail-in ballots are delivered, automatically delivering mail-in or absentee ballots in certain states to anyone who's registered to vote, whether it's an old registration, whether they registered 10 years ago and they haven't voted in the past 4 years, so maybe somebody else is living there, maybe they've moved out of state. Then on top of that, a lot of states relaxed the laws on on signature verification for voters, on double checking voters' addresses, making sure that someone who voted is still registered in an address in the state. So many voter verification procedures were pulled back. So many procedures to make it easier to get ballots into people's hands were put into place. And when you combine the two, when you start shipping ballots out to everyone and you start reducing the number of checks that you have on the ballots that are coming in to ensure verification, and then on top of that, when you start registering anyone who comes in for a driver's license, whether they're a citizen or not, it creates problems that people are sketched out by. And to dismiss those problems as either xenophobic, to dismiss those concerns as xenophobic or voter suppression is to ignore the fact that we had over 100 years of successful elections without any of these procedures being put in place. And when you look at how the numbers that COVID created as a disease and how it wasn't a pandemic, and they had to change the definition of the word pandemic to get it to fit, how they had to change the definition of herd immunity to demand vaccination. When you start putting all of these things together, all of a sudden you realize that COVID never even justified these changes to begin with. And so we have massive changes to our election processes that many states made. Many of these states on their surface, these election changes don't even seem to follow the state's constitution. And when all of that is put together, yes, people are sketched out. People have a right to be sketched out. People have a right to have an opinion and to have their concerns heard and to have a nuanced discussion where everyone involved is making a genuine effort to understand each other and approaching each other with patience. Without these kind of conversations, tensions rise and people are polarized. And to live in a country like that is dangerous, and we cannot allow this to continue. It doesn't matter if you disagree with someone. It doesn't matter if you think their opinion is ridiculous. It doesn't matter if you think their opinion only exists because they've been lied to by some corporate propaganda. You need to be patient with them, and you need to approach them in good faith with the desire to help them learn. If they have been bought up by corporate propaganda, if I am a fool who has been completely bought up by corporate propaganda, and I am like, without realizing it, turning into some kind of authoritarian fascist, dude, listen to my rhetoric. I care about people. I want the community to be better. I want there to be more freedom. Like, clearly, if that's the system that I'm under and I'm brainwashed in that way, clearly approaching me with empathy and understanding that I want the same thing as you and we will both want a better society, and just working to help me understand the ways that I have been confused is much more effective than trying to use ad hominem attacks, trying to insult someone, trying to get over on someone emotionally. Like, dude, it doesn't matter if you're on the right or on the left. Approaching people with animosity is not going to do anything except help the exact people that want to destroy this country. We need to have honest, nuanced, patient, genuine conversations with each other, or we don't have a chance to save this country, period. And so, you know, I kind of went off a little bit there, but I wanted to express the differences between India's electoral college system and the US, because India mainly prioritizes efficiency through centralized federal control, right? And the U.S. prioritizes sovereignty and decentralization, right? India prioritizes a parliamentary democracy and accurately representing the population. The U.S. prioritizes balancing the needs of the population majority against the needs of the population's minority. And the difference in these systems largely makes up the difference in experience, but also the other variable in there is all the changes they made with COVID, you know? And so, like, we need to have a nuanced understanding of this stuff. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to reach out to the other side, and we're never going to be able to articulate to progressives why classical liberals like us feel so disaffected and by the left. So yeah, that's what I wanted to get into, guys. You know, what lessons can the U.S. learn from India? What lessons can India learn from the U.S., right? Like, does our electoral system have a relevant relationship to how much lower our economic disparity is between the U.S. and India? You know, that's a relevant question. Another question is, you know, can we combine efficiency with fairness in our elections post-COVID? Are these trade-offs inherent to our democracy? Should we accept the narratives from our election institutions justifying many of these procedural election changes that have been made in many of these states across the country post-COVID? I think that's a genuine question. I think we need to take a look at these narratives and why we're being told by these institutions that these election changes are necessary, and really take a look at each one case by case and say, is this true? Do we need this? You know, because me personally, I think we should go back to paper ballots, and I think we should go back to one day. Stay up all night. Count that, bro. Like stop. No, it's one day every 4 years. You can do it. You can make it. Anyway, that's my opinion on it. I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for joining me. I think this kind of took up enough time. I might come out with another one a little later, but this kind of allowed me to get into a lot more detail. So this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, guys. I'll see you on the next one. Have a great day, y'all.